Okay, good morning. Good morning, Rabbi Isai. Let's get started. So yesterday, what we saw in the Aruch HaShulchan is that there can sometimes be a problem within a community where there's such just which is just the opposite of what is being described in the Shulchan Aruch. That instead of um, a seller charging too much of a profit margin, you could also sometimes have a problem where the competition is so cutthroat and the profit margins are so razor thin that it doesn't allow anyone who goes into the business, unless he's a huge supermarket, to be able to make a profit. And that is essentially, what has happened in the 21st century, already starting in the 20th century with the, with the WalMarts and the supermarkets, is that anyone who is a small mom and pop operation, right? That's what's happened over the years, is that they've been forced to close because they don't have the buying power, and as a result, they cannot compete with large resellers who lower the prices so much that they put other people out of business. And so all of these halachas that we're talking about now they're talking about a different economic model that really it doesn't really is not really that prevalent anymore in the modern world, in the information age, where and in an age where you have the big keep getting bigger and the small can't compete. So that I thought that was an interesting insight. But let's finish now this sif in the Rav Shulchan Aruch. So there's an obligation to make sure v'cheachicha imach, that you have an obligation to make sure that your brother lives with you, and therefore when it comes to essential commodities, you have to make sure that your profit margins are very modest, and he said you have to keep it to 20% or below. And if anyone does not abide by this, then you have the Beis Din, when they're in power, has permission to impose fines and even physical corporal punishment whenever necessary. Um, so again, that also, according to the Aruch HaShulchan, no longer applies. And today, all that the rabbinic community can do in order to instruct the members of their community is that do be an erlich yid, as we say in Yiddish. Be an honest person, be an honest Jew, and try to keep in mind that you have customers that are relying on you for their livelihood. Okay, so he writes, "Bamedvar mamurim b'mocher scharasum miyad below toirach." So he says, when do we say that you can only make a profit margin of 20%? Is when you're selling goods that you yourself are the manufacturer of, and therefore you acquire those goods with very little effort as far as transportation and purchase. Aval chenveni hamocher ma'at ma'at, and also you don't have a lot of overhead. Aval chenveni hamocher ma'at ma'at, shamin lo tircha v'chol yitziosav umutar alehen umosar alehen rather yarviach shtos. He says, but if you are a retailer and you have overhead and you have a store and you have transportation costs of getting the commodity to the customer, so then you put all of that into the cost. So you have a net cost, which may be that the widget itself costs $10, but you have to you have to tack on another $2 or $3 or sometimes more in order to factor in the overhead. And then you can charge 20% above that. Bamed dvarim amurim shelo hukar hasha'ar me'ei shekana. Aval im hukar hasha'ar yachol limkor lekefi hayoker af al pi shenisyaker kiflayim mehashar shekanahu. He says, and another exception to the rule is if when you purchase, your purchase cost has not fluctuated. But let's say the market, you happen to have been fortunate enough that when you purchased these widgets, the market value, the market index was at $10. And all of a sudden there was a huge fluctuation, and now widgets are now at $20. So you're allowed to charge $20 plus 20%, even though that's well above a 20% at the cost that you had purchased it at. But since that's now the market price, and that's what everyone else is selling it for, you have a right to make a significant margin above that. And now, and then another exception is v'chol zeh ba'ochlenu mashkin atzman. He says, and this, of course, is when it comes to essentials of food and drink items, like we said, oil, flour, wine, meat, bread. We had included all of those in that category. Avol b'machshirei ochel nefesh. But let's say it's items that are not essentials, but they're used to help you to help you prepare the food. Kigon kimonu palpalin v'chayotzi bahen mishar hatavlin, cumin, pepper, and all other kinds of spices. He says v'chein bebeitzim, and also eggs. He seems to say that eggs are not an essential commodity. Muter laharviach ad hakefel velo ad bichlal. So you are allowed to make a profit of up to double, but not up to, but not inclusive of double. So it wasn't clear from the language of the Aruch HaShulchan, but here it seems that he's saying that you can make up to 100% on your profit, up to 100%. Let's say 99, but not 100. Udvarim so that's when it comes to food items which are non-essential food items. So essential food items, you have an obligation to provide to the market because you have to sustain a community. Non-essentials, you can charge up to 100% profit. And udvarim, and then the third category is udvarim she'enan ochel nefesh klal, kigan hakoshet v'halavona. And then he says, but what about commodities, even consumable commodities that are not essential at all to a person's food, to a person's diet? They're not part of a staple of diet at all. Let's say incense or other kinds of fragrances. Okay, so these are things that a person likes for his house. Let's say they were typically used as either perfume or as room deodorizers. And the fact is that people really stunk back then. I mean, things were pretty stinky in the old world. Before the 20th century, where everything, like the 2,000-year-old man Mel Brooks used to say, everyone smells like a strawberry today. But in the old days, people were pretty smelly, and houses were pretty smelly, because there was no hygiene was not the same way that it is today. And so what did people do? They used fragrances to mask a lot of the bad odors. So mutter laharviach bahen kama sheyirtze. Then on those things which are consumables but they're not essential and they're not even food items, so then you can make whatever profit you want, whatever the market will bear. Afilu kifle kiflaim. Even many times over 100%. You can charge whatever you want. The Yesh Omrim, Shebeitzim, and by the way, that's what certain there are different business models for retailers. Sometimes retailers will choose one or two items that are non-essential, and they'll mark up the profit on them hugely, right? Things I'm not even sure what I'm saying is accurate, but let's say artificial sweeteners, the prices on artificial sweeteners are very, very high. Coffee, tea, sometimes the markups on those things are very, very high, because the resellers know that consumers like to buy these items and are willing to pay more because they know that they're luxury items, that they're not essential items, but people are willing to pay more for them. And so that's how supermarkets, even though they'll have very, very razor-thin profit margins on certain things, will inflate prices on other things. V'yesh omrim shebeitzim heim ochel nefesh mamish. There are those who put eggs in the category of essential food items. One opinion is that eggs are non-essential. Another opinion is that eggs are essential. Ela shelafishi yesh torach b'kniyasam ma'at hakfarim mutter lihistaker bahem yoser mishtos. He says the argument, however, is that despite the fact that eggs are essential, but it takes a lot of effort to purchase eggs. So again, this is all before factory farming. Are you familiar with the term factory farming, where they now they have these egg-laying facilities where they treat, and so I'm very unfortunate, but they treat hens like they are like they are basically machinery, and they put them in these very, very tightly packed facilities where that's the whole life of the hen, is just to lay eggs constantly.
Cages.
What?
They put turkeys in cages
Not just turkeys.
in these gigantic barns, and the machinery cleans them, they feed them, everything.
Yeah, yeah. So it becomes, unfortunately, this factory farming is really a problem of tsar balei chaim, and inflicting pain upon living creatures. And I don't think that we're not going to be able to solve that problem today. But in the old
Well,
days, how did you buy eggs? You went to your local farmer, and he had, maybe he had 100 hens or 50 hens, whatever many hens he had. And when he sold out for the day, there were no more eggs. And 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 if you're a reseller and you're in the big city, you have to take your wagon to all of the different villages in the outlying areas, pick up as many eggs as you can from the local farmers, bring it into the city. It's a very, very labor intensive business, much more labor intensive than the selling of wine or oil and flour and other commodities, because it requires a lot of transportation. And so therefore the rabbis allowed you to make more than 20% because of the added labor involved. And therefore the halacha fluctuates depending upon whether you're the one who does the labor or not. Aval hakona mizeh shetarach b'kniyasam lo yistaker bahem klal elamochran b'keren bilvad. He says, so if, let's say, there's a guy that is the one who goes around schlepping from farm to farm to buy eggs, and then sells them to a middleman, who then turns around and sells them to actually the driver is the middleman. He sells them to all the retailers, and the retailers therefore don't make any effort at all. So then, according to this opinion, you have to sell the eggs at cost. You have to sell the eggs at cost. Why? Lefisha habeitzim ein metzuyim limkor kol kach, ela ish echad mechazer al hakfarim v'kona meharbe balabatim echad umochran. He says, because, the way I've just described it, is that eggs are very difficult to obtain for large populations, and it requires a person to go around and schlep around from one farm to the other. And the concern is that if we allow the retailer, after he's already paid the labor costs to the guy who's driving and picking up the eggs and delivering them to the resellers, if we allow the retailer to elevate the price, then the price of eggs is going to go through the roof and won't be affordable anymore. And therefore, according to this, if I have a general store where I'm selling a whole bunch of different commodities, I'm allowed to make profit on all of my commodities, but I can only provide eggs for sale as a service to my customers, and I'm not allowed to make profit on it at all, unless I actually am the one who goes and picks them up from the farm. So there's that opinion, and he says v'yesh lachush l'divreihem, and therefore it's worthwhile to be concerned about this opinion, and therefore if you are a retailer, you should try not, and you're getting it from a guy who travels, you should try not to make any profit. B'chol zeh, kishrashi hakol mashkichan al hasha'arim lahafrish kol hamocher milihistaker b'chol davar yoter mishiuro haroilo. Now, everything that is aforementioned, where there are limits on how much profit I'm allowed to make, is only when the community is run like a ship, where there are community leaders who are supervising all of the other sellers and are making sure that everyone is abiding by these rules. Aval im ein mashkichin al zeh, b'chol echad mocher u'mistaker kamo sheyirtzeh. But if it's lawless, like it is today, where it's totally free enterprise, and we whatever the market will bear, it'll bear, and everyone sells based on what they feel is a fair market price and what they feel they can make on it. So then, af hayore devar Hashem ein sarich limkor levado bizol yoser mikol hamochrim, and therefore, if a Jew is a God-fearing person, he doesn't have to lower his prices in order to abide by these requirements if no one else in the city is doing so. Bein shehim Yisrael, bein shehim nochrim, and it doesn't matter whether, even if he's the only Jewish seller, and all of the others are Gentiles, but if there are no community standards that are required by the governmental authorities or by the communal authorities, then all of these halachos are off the table. But if everyone is selling at a certain standard, you should not inflate your prices more than what everyone else is selling it at, unless you are conforming to the aforementioned standards. So therefore, the final caveat, he says, is that even in a city where there is no communal standard, right, and everyone just sells it for whatever they want, if you are a God-fearing Jew and you're selling essential commodities, you should make sure that your prices either are in step with what everyone else is selling, and if you want to sell it for more, let's say you're a convenience store, and you want to sell it for more than what they're selling it for, then you have to start being concerned about the profit margin limitations that we've mentioned in this. And if it's an essential commodity, you can't charge more than 20% profit on your net cost. Okay.
Can I ask one quick question on that?
Sure.
Going back to coffee, with coffee in hand, and some of us do have coffee in hand. How do we define an essential service? I think we kind of said that coffee can be charged whatever you want because the people will pay for what they way above. But isn't that because in some ways it's essential to them? So, I mean, are we talking about nutritional value, or are we talking about, um, what people need? And does that make it essential?
The word "need," I think, is being misused in your sentence, Paul.
Addicted.
There are there are essential staples to every diet depending upon the geographic location. So whatever is an essential staple to a diet for nutritional purposes. In some communities, that's flour. In some communities, that's where bread is not consumed as much. It might be corn. Let's say in certain South American or Latin American countries, corn may be more of an essential grain commodity than wheat.
There's rice in Asia, for example.
Or rice in Asia, exactly, right? But whatever staple whatever grain staple is considered an essential commodity because it's an essential part of the nutritional diet of that society. But everyone agrees that coffee is not an essential staple of a person's diet. It's something that people enjoy drinking, but if there was no coffee, people would drink water, right? In other words, we are a society that has become addicted to coffee, but everyone, I think, I mean, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think everyone agrees that coffee and tea are beverages that we drink because we enjoy them, not because we need them.
I hear. I hear the distinction. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Um, so actually, uh, if the Imrei Yaakov addresses a bit of this definition of what's an essential item in Sifkat and Samach over here. He says, Ba'ochel umashkin atzman. He says, Da'as habach de lo mikre chaye nefesh rak dvarim she'i efshar bil adam. He says the Bach, who's one of the commentaries on the Tur, says that what's considered essential is something that people can't live really and have a nutritious diet without. Aval beitzim, o afilu sha'ar peiros she'ein behem tzorach kol kach lo. But let's say eggs. Eggs is not an essential, according to this, that first opinion, we said that eggs is not an essential staple. And also produce. Certain produce items are non-essential. Apples, peaches, grapes, things like that are not an essential part of a person's diet. They certainly make life more enjoyable, but you can certainly live without your apple. Aval harav sasam dvarv kishitas abeis Yosef, disvir le dechol meichel haroi la'adam mikri oichel nefesh. But it seems like the Rav Shulchan Aruch is more broad in his definition, like the Beit Yosef, who says that all foods that people consume are considered within the category of Ochel Nefesh. I'm not sure if I agree with the Imrei Yaakov that the Rav Shulchan Aruch is saying this, because it seems like he said with eggs, he brought two opinions. Some say that eggs are essential, or not. Or some say that eggs are non-essential, and therefore you could charge whatever you want, or actually up to double. And some say that that eggs are non-essential. The only differentiation that the Rav Shulchan Aruch had made was that for all food items, any consumable food item, you can only charge up to 100% profit. But for essentials, you can only charge up to 20% profit. So, and then there's the machlokas: are eggs considered to be an essential staple or not? And so that's where we saw a difference of opinion.
Rabbi, one question. What about, we're talking about food items. What about other items like toilet paper or like hand sanitizer? Maybe they were not essential in some point, but later on they become essential because of the pandemic situation. So
Right.
we have to adjust the pricing on these items,
Yeah,
or because
that's a very legitimate question. First of all, does the nature of what's considered essential change based upon the needs of whatever society you're living in? So I think the answer is yes. In other words, like I said, if you live in Asia, it's rice instead of wheat. If you live in Latin America, it's corn instead of wheat. So I think yes, for sure, there is going to be a difference. But I also think that you can make the application to things that we treat as essential, such as toilet paper. Um, what are some other essentials that you would say apply today in the world? Water.
hand sanitizer, for
Yeah,
example, now.
it could be that in a world during a pandemic, hand sanitizers and masks are considered to be essentials, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean that's what we saw. What was happening on Amazon was that people were hoarding the market. They were buying all of these commodities, and then they were jacking up the prices. So this is a perfect example of there's an obligation of v'chei achicha imach, that you have an obligation to make sure that your brother survives with you. And if you inflate the prices so high that he no longer has financial access to these commodities, so then you're in violation of that. But remember, we said that applies, all of this halacha only applies to your fellow Jew. It doesn't apply to a non-Jew. because that obligation to make sure that everyone, I don't have there, I have an obligation to make sure that my fellow Jew can survive with me. But I don't have an obligation to make sure that a non-Jew survives. Let that non-Jewish compatriot um, uh, take that burden of responsibility. That's not my responsibility as a Jew, right? But at some point, a governmental authority or a communal authority should make it a rule that in order to make sure that we don't have people starving or dying in the streets, that we have to create certain standards. And I think during the pandemic, I think what essentially we saw is that people were able to hoard only temporarily, and eventually the manufacturers were able to keep up pace with all of the needs of the market. Um, so for a short period of time during the pandemic, we saw an interesting phenomenon. We saw the prices be inflated because of supply and demand, that there simply wasn't enough supply to keep up with the demand of hand sanitizer and masks and toilet paper. And then eventually the market adjusted itself, and people were able to get what they needed. Another commodity which you could discuss is yeast. If you remember, yeast for a certain amount of time. Now, I would argue that perhaps in today's market, yeast is an essential commodity if you make bread. But so just like he said before that bread is like bread and meat, we had said is an essential commodity. Perhaps if everyone is making their own bread, then yeast becomes an essential commodity as well. But again, it's there's a lot of gray area over here. Okay. So let's start Yud Ches. We'll just start the first few lines. And he says that there's a unique halacha to Eretz Yisrael. Be'eretz Yisrael v'chein b'kol makom sherubo Yisrael. If you live in Eretz Yisrael, or if you live in a community where the majority of the residents are Jewish, asur liknos peros sheish behem chayin nefesh min hashuk u'lahachnis la'otzar k'dei lachzor l'mochram be'es hayoker. So you're not allowed to purchase commodities like produce, which is considered an essential staple, let's say wheat or oil, right? And to hoard it so that you can later sell it at a higher price when the prices go up. So those people who were hoarding, right, the toilet paper were in violation of this if it was at the expense of their Jewish brethren. Shaharei magia davar zet sa'ar li Yisrael, because this causes anguish to the Jewish people, your fellow Jews. Ushemiyakir hashar, and it raises the prices. Baha'osa kein hareze kemalva beribis sha'over al v'cheyachicha imach. And again, if you do this, it's like you're lending money with interest, where the Torah says you're exploiting your fellow Jew, and the Torah, after all, says you have to let your brother live with you. The olav hakasuv omer, and about such a person, the pasuk says, Lemor masaya avor hachodesh v'nashbia shever v'hashabas v'niftecha bar, that there are people who say, let's wait a while until the prices go up, and only then will we open up our storehouses. And Maksuv Acharav, and what does it say right afterwards? Nishpa Hashem big'on Yaakov im eshkach lanetzach kol ma'aseim v'gomer. That God swears that I will never forget what these people have done, and I will be always prepared to bring retribution against such individuals. Okay, and this is where we'll hold it for today. There are no other questions or comments.
Just, Rabbi, one quick question on that last point. Are we distinguishing your intent? In other words, if you buy up more than you need for immediate use because you're worried about the future, as opposed to buying it so that you can resell it at a higher price and take advantage. So a distinction has the same impact on the community, but it's for a different reason.
That's a very good question. A lot of people had the moral dilemma when they were buying toilet paper in the store, and there were, let's say, 10 rolls left, and they said, well, who knows if I'm going to be able to find more toilet paper later, let me buy all 10 rolls. But then they realized that it would be at the expense of all of the other consumers. I think a lot of it, I mean, why don't we talk about this tomorrow? Let's give it some thought, but I think a lot of it will depend upon whether, how many other consumers are there. If there are 100 other consumers and there's only 10 of this product left,
It's not
so
going to make a difference.
it's not going to make a difference to more than another 9 people. But let's say I'm hoarding all of it, and I'm going to be depriving the majority of the community that commodity because of my hoarding. Even if it is for personal use, it's probably wrong to do.
And Jewish versus non-Jewish
Yeah.
as well, who the other consumers are.
Yeah.
Looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Take care.
Take care. Be well.